Blessed love and peace in Rastafari. So we're sharing. I'm back at this joint, so we're sharing some joints briefly. At least intentionally intended this briefly, but we know there are other intentions in this life and susceptibilities and all them other things. So, anyways, I'm online for the moment. I'm generally offline at this point, indefinitely off the grid. So whilst I'm here checking in, I am sharing this joint. I just uploaded another recitation of Tobadi Goga Dao. And so check in with emails and catch up with correspondences briefly, and then about to be out again indefinitely. See, God willing. So in the meantime, I'll just share with some thoughts. Beautiful conversations in recent days with beautiful brethren and sistren who are doing some beautiful things here in the Kyoka area and around the world, within the Rastafari community, within the global community, the world community, and further. How about that? So spiritual prayer, meditation, the inner work of righteousness and rightedness. Anyway, so with these conversations, like further ideas, further solutions, further insights, and like further topics for further convo. And so, God willing, that continues. We have the schoolhouse for the moment, God, by the grace of God and by the will of God, and God willing, continually, where I reside. Again, I've shared the address before. It's Mayfield Road. It's not 24/7, but it's 2724. How about that? So we continue with that. Again, we got the framework. We're working on putting the rest of it together, and so we continue to have conversations accordingly. So I got some notes, to be honest, and so I'm just gonna proceed along these lines, rather than getting into all the work that's being done, the projects, and additionally, because that maybe after I share this, but this one is further of a trod type sense, rather than, and by trod I mean spiritual understanding of conditions and things like that, the abstractions, rather than the actual tangible works of being in relationship with these abstractions and manifestations. So it's very necessary to talk about the tangibilities, the works, but for the moment, I'm sharing these insights, and to be honest, I have to be mindful of this. I recognize a lot of the things that I share, that's shared with me, is at this point, particularly at this point, it's been that way for years and years and years, but particularly at this point, it's increasingly appropriate, particularly and primarily and prioritatively for kinfolk who are increasingly increasing predilection, increasing preparedness. How about that? Preparedness for this type of pontification. And it's not just a matter of having the intelligence, because it doesn't. This kind of insight doesn't come from the intellect. It doesn't come from the intelligence primarily. It comes from an experience of living and truth, and additionally an awareness. So, and it's difficult. And so when things are difficult, people say, "Oh, that's crazy talk," and that's fine. People can say what people want. But at the same time, it's less constructive. It's what's the purpose of just sharing it, particularly in just this kind of general type of joint. So, that being said, I'm being further guided towards doing these type of things less frequently, less readily, and instead sharing. Because even the insight that I'm having at this moment, it's difficult. It's building on previous sharings, and so. It's a lot to present as a beginning introductory thing, because it references things that are previously shared, recognition, things that are recognized in life in the universe, in terms of even historical events, and additionally. So these are building upon that. So all that being said, the greatest wisdom of the earth from the time immemorial is the wisdom that can be shared in a very simple way with simple people, and I continue to work to strive to have that type of wisdom. Meanwhile, I do the best I can. So with all that being said, whoever is still here after 5 minutes, beauty. Now we get into it. So this is about what conditions of today and creation. So for those who have an awareness about the narratives within Torah, and to a certain extent the Gospels, but the Bible, the flood. This is within the Quran as well. Um, there's talk about the flood in other traditions, native traditions, and additionally, but the basic gist of it is, particularly in the narrative within Torah with Noah, is that humanity reaches a certain point of living, civilization, and is corrupt, and is just woeful in terms of indulging in the senses, eating, consumption of flesh, sexual activity, violence, and all these things. The Buddha talks about this actually too in a very similar way, in terms of the denigration of civilization, the denigration of human existence and behavior, the depravity. The Buddha talks about this very similarly and specifically, stage by stage, of what actually happens in the causal relation between the things, about one thing going wrong and then one thing going wrong, one behavior of wrongness, of hurtfulness happening, and then from that, then additional behavior of hurtfulness, and then just escalates in a downward spiral until it's just all out kind of buck wildness and all different types of respects or disrespects. So, anyways, as a result, in the narrative of Torah with Noah, and again, this is in the Quran and further, the response is the flood of cleaning it all out, drowning it all out. And so the thing, and the way the Creator works, the way that the Most High works, is that the things that give us sustenance are the exact things in which we become enveloped and ultimately undone, as need be. And so it's those who have that modesty, the wisdom, and the moderation that are able, even amidst the niceties, that are able to persevere and proceed beyond the afflictions and the cleansings. So in this particular narrative of the flood, the waters arrive, and it's the rain. It's the rain that nourishes and brings the green and trees and everything else like that actually undoes the life, because it just piles up. Oh, you like the eatery, you like this and the other. How about flood? And that's actually in the narrative of the Torah as well, particularly with Moshe Rabbeinu, when the children of Israel are complaining about not there being no food. We used to eat nice when we were enslaved in Egypt, but now all we have is this like fake bread or whatever that just hot, and we don't even know what it is. And so the response is, oh, you want food, you want that those nice pheasants and birds and fowl and everything else that you were eating in Egypt. Here it is, boom, to your nostrils till you vomit. So anyways, in this particular instance, in the flood, it's just the waters arrive, and it just rains and rains and rains. The waters pile up. Noah is directed to have an ark to save the people, save himself and other kinfolk of his ilk, who are sharing in that moderation, in that righteous path, to persevere through the flood. So now the thing about it is that when the flood subsides, when all the life is cleansed from the earth in this narrative, then there's a covenant that's established of saying, okay, well, now it's done, but it's just the nature of people. Like, people are just have the proclivity or the susceptibility towards the depravity. So, but at the same time, there's the promise of there never being a flood again. Like, there won't be a flood. That's what Elohim promises to Noah and the progeny of Noah, that there will never be a flood again. So, regardless of how much humanity trips, how much human beings trip, and additionally, like, there won't be a flood. And then, but there's the sign of the rainbow as a sign of this covenant, and a reminder, and further a reassurance, a calming, and additionally. So, anyways, that's it. Now, what is understood later, and to be honest, I have to think about where this actually comes in, because it's not within Torah, to the best of my knowledge, at least explicitly, and it might be coming from something else, maybe Revelation, something. To be honest, I'm uncertain at the moment, but there is something that talks about the fire. The prolific writer Baldwin years ago talks about the fire next time, meaning that, okay, yeah, God said that God would not provide the flood to eliminate humanity, but the next time that humanity trips into the necessity of needing to clear everything out, the fire arrives. The fire next time. The next time it's not going to be the flood, it's going to be a fire. How about that? And so, however that emerges, like whatever the origin is of that, again, I'm certain what the citation is. It might be something from Nevi'im or Ketuvim. I'm uncertain, just to be honest. But it's something that's known for generations. The fire next time. And so here's the consideration within that. And also, I provide the preface. I'm not from our trod and from our walk in life, our spiritual practice and background, we don't put a lot of stock in prophecies, to be honest with you, because prophecies are actually relevant only when people aren't practicing. When people aren't living the way of righteousness, that's when people get caught up in the prophecies of like, oh, how are we going to get advantage in this and the other. When people are worrying about the future, that's because people aren't living righteous today. And when people put so much stock about like the fulfillment of prophecy and getting sense, I'm not knocking it, and it's due respect to that, but it's just a matter of recognizing that when people are trotting in the righteous walk, like it's not even a matter about past or present, it's the eternal way of things. So when people put a lot of stock into the prophecy, like it's going to happen, and start like putting their trust and commitment and allegiance to the prophetic things, we're concerned about that. So like the fire next time, it's something that people talk about, but at the same time, it's a matter of putting it in context, because the emphasis is walking the righteous path, regardless of what the elements are: fire, earth, wind, fire. There's something missing there: water, darkness, seas, whatever. So that being said, here's the consideration. Because prophecy is honesty, like there is truth within prophecy when we understand it properly. The prophets of the Nevi'im and the Ketuvim provide tremendous wisdom and guidance. So it's beneficial, because the prophets emerge when people are tripping, and the prophets will be like, yo, y'all are tripping, and here's what's going to happen because y'all are tripping. This is the message that the Most High is sharing because tripping. So there's legitimacy in truth. But it's just a matter of not staking what one does based upon the prophecy. It's staking what one does based upon the teachings. That's what it is. So, all that being said, as a way of seemingly contradict what I just mentioned, the fire next time. How about this? We are seeing it at this moment. When one thinks of the fire next time in terms of cleansing the whole of the earth, all of life, one might think, again, something on the scale of a flood, just a complete annihilation. How about no? How about nah? That's not how it's happening right now. It's not some nuclear holocaust that just annihilates and obliterates people, all life from the earth. No, that's not what we're saying. I'm not saying it's not impossible of ever happening, but people have been threatening that for over 50 years that I know of, but even before that. So. And I'm reminded that, I guess, in popular culture, there's something coming out, some film or whatever, but that's not what it is. That's not what we see. It could be it sometime, but that's not what we see happening at this moment. The fire next time is happening at this moment, and it's not an obliteration, annihilation kind of thing where it's just very evident, like, oh, here it comes, yeah, there it is. The fire next time is a very quiet, slow burn. That's what it is, and it's been building for generations, at least 7 generations to this point. And so what it is this right here. It's these devices, that slow, very comfortable, slow, quiet burn that's just annihilating our attention, annihilating our sense of relationship and belonging and comfort and ease. It's slowly, quietly infiltrating itself within the core of our essence of being, and additionally. It's opiate. It's an opiate. That's the fire this time, and then it begins, like I said, 7 generations ago, with the harnessing of electricity. That's the fire, and then through technology and the prolific, amazing innovations of technology, it becomes increasingly infiltrating, because all the technology simply helps people to compete with each other, and takes people away from the nature of the garden, of the nature of creation. All technology is man-made. As amazing as it is, as fantastic as it is, as pervasive as it is, as much as we rely upon it to do the basic things in life, it all comes from man's intentions, man's inventions, man's innovation, man's genius. It's amazing, but at the same time, it's divisive. And it is divisive between beings, between people, but it's divisive between an individual and the natural world, the nature, the life, the natural life of creation that we are born into. So it's beneficial to recognize that, because in that space, in that gap, in that void, there is fear, there is isolation, loneliness, pain, insecurity, depression, greed, lust, anger, hostility, all these things. In that detachment, in that sense of detachment, in that experience, that phenomena of detachment, the realm of detachment that we self-inflict upon ourselves, because we're searching for that connection, but we're doing it in a way that just further isolates ourselves. So, and it's our own doing. It's nobody else to blame but ourselves. And it's very difficult to avoid it. I'm doing it right now. So nobody's innocent or not guilty, whatever, but it's not a matter of guilt or innocence. It's just a matter of understanding the nature of things. So everybody's involved to one degree or another in one way or another. So, but that's what it is. That's the fire this time. That is how human civilization is annihilating itself at this moment. It's the quiet, slow burn for generations that continually builds. It's that glow. It's that glow from the devices that people fixate their eyes upon, their concentration upon, their energy upon, and it builds and builds and builds through the generations, from just, again, simple harnessing of electricity to eventually the evolution of media, from recordings, transmission, sound, video, motion picture, to radio, television, satellite communication, then to the internet, radar, I already said satellite communication, wireless, smartphones. So it becomes increasingly accessible, increasingly convenient, increasingly immediate, and as close as it is within itself, it becomes a barrier to the life around us. With the kinfolk, I'm seeing sisters and brethren that I know, that I speak with right now, that are having conversations with other people at this moment, and we have yet to even talk with each other. But that's the nature of things these days. And people can say crazy. We have to be careful of that word, because it's too much of an escape and just like a release type of thing. But it is of concern. So that's the fire this time, the slow, quiet burn. That is separating us from each other and from natural life, the garden experience. If we just think about like garden, wherever it is, if it's the tundra, if it's the cold forests of Scandinavia, if it's the Serengeti, and the continual experience of summer along the equator, the continual perennial growing of produce and life amidst the lions and everything else, whether the garden is a tropic jungle in Southeast Asia, whether it's the native forest of the Western Hemisphere, wherever our experience of garden is, we each come from that. We each come from that experience of, without technology or advanced technology, at least electricity technology, we come from an experience of direct interaction, direct relationship, direct harmony, to some extent or another, with the natural world, with the garden, and the technology provides. And technology is not a boogeyman; it's not evil. It's a matter of recognizing that technology is only valuable. The value that technology provides is in getting a larger part of the garden for ourselves and competing with each other along those lines. So. I'm getting visitation from additional four-footed brethren. Squirrel. So that's what technology is. That's what technology does, and we all utilize it. Whether it's a shovel or whether it's a space shuttle, the purpose of the technology, the function of the technology, is to get a larger part of the garden, and it draws us away from that instinct of sharing, that instinct of harmony. And that instinct of balance and moderation, that guidance, that divine providence of sharing and balance and harmony. And so, again, technology is not evil, but it is a man-made construct that has the benefit for the individual at the cost of relationship. So. Part of the guidance as we look for solutions is to be mindful of this, just to understand the nature of it. It's not a matter of evil or pure or holy. It's just a matter of understanding the nature of it, and recognizing that the nature of healing and well-being is the nature of relationship. It is the relationship of harmony, and that means letting go of a certain amount of the technology, downsizing, scaling down. The necessity, the reliability, the prevalence. It's not a matter of like down with technology, but it's a matter of like, let's be mindful about technology. and let's cultivate and relearn some of these instincts that we have from our generations, from our ancestors, about our relationship with the natural world. I don't have it with me at the moment, but I picked up some acorns today, again, and thinking like, yo, where are these acorns coming from? Because it still seems to be early. We're like it's still near the middle of the summer, mid late summer. Yo, acorns come out like in the fall, at least as I presume. But yo, I keep seeing like these green acorns, and they did not, and they're firm, they're hard, so they did not last through the winter like that, because the acorns turn brown. And those that go through the winter, yo, they rot. They've been absorbing the rains and the snow and everything else like that, and then they wouldn't be just on the sidewalk like fresh green on the sidewalk. So they're coming from someplace. I look at the oak trees above where the acorns are presumably coming from, and yo, I don't see any acorns on the trees. So what's happening with this? So still working on it. And I talked with an uncle today on my way out here about that. Meet him for the first time in my life, and he's just like, yeah, interesting. So we had a conversation about that. But I was telling him like, yo, I'm relearning, because that's what's involved in terms of health and well-being. What are we talking about? It's not just a matter of like a feeling of health. It's an experience. It's a relationship with nature. Because whatever we're feeling in terms of our body, whatever symptoms we experience, it's not some chemical, or it's not just some chemical experience that requires some type of balance through an apothecary kind of balance of chemicals. It's a consequence, it's an outcome of our relationship with nature, and in some type of imbalance based upon what we're consuming, most likely, how we're behaving, how we're exercising or not exercising, and accordingly. And so when we become so acculturated to technology and sedentariness, and additionally, we also lose sight of like, oh, what are the plants around us that we can actually eat that provide us nutrients that we need for healing? Yes, herbs, but also like just for sustenance. What is edible? What's not going to poison us and otherwise? So mushrooms, berries, and additionally, kinfolk like myself, we have a lot of relearning to do to get cultivated. But that's what healing is. That's what true health is. It's understanding that relationship. And kinfolk can argue with me all kinfolk want about that, but things speak for themselves ultimately and eventually. So, anyways, that's part of the solution is green nature and being. So, additionally, I'm kind of jumping from notes in the sequence and progression, but going back to some of the experience of affliction and the fire, the slow, quiet burn. Again, it's not some overpowering inundation. It's something that we're doing through ourselves, that's manifesting through our own behavior. And there's a narcissistic transcendence that's involved in these devices, where even when we don't utilize devices just for like greedy, ambitious type stuff or whatever, even when we look for health and look for things like that, when we look for affirmation, and additionally, that, again, these devices are like the oracle, where we're simply looking for ourselves in the devices, whoever we're listening to, whatever the iPod is, or the podcast, or whatever else it is. Like, we're looking for ourselves, and we're looking at ourselves, and we're just looking for kinfolk who display some aspect that we want to think further about ourselves. So there is a very narcissistic tendency in social media, and additionally of this experience of affirmation. It's not just the it's not just, hey brother Julian, all right, it's not just the endorphins or whatever people call it, the chemical rush that people get. It's existential yearning for affirmation. Exactly what I'm doing right now in sharing this. It's an affirmation of I'm sharing information for those who have benefit, and there are people who communicate having benefit. It's somewhat for the archives, but it's also just for my own purpose of sharing what I've learned, and for my own kind of self affirmation. So again, there are healthier ways of doing this: direct communication, direct conversation with kinfolk, and additionally outside of these media joints. So but at the same time, I do know people benefit from this, and so it's part of that process of weaning. So it's not just a matter of like going cold turkey necessarily, but just recognizing what it is, and then further making steps towards what is healthy. Petit à petit, l'oiseau met son nid. Little by little, the bird builds its nest, builds her nest, builds his nest. But birds are building nests too. Is there a second generation of birds in the same season? Like, I'm seeing what looks like a second generation of birds this summer, and they don't look like the birds that I saw earlier in the spring, as like the first hatchlings. This looks like the next generation of hatchlings. But I'm unaware of that being a thing, of like birds procreating, having numerous generations in 1 year. So for those that have information about that, let's chop it up, talk further about that. I'm studying like Kung Fu Z. So, but again, this joint is narcissistic, and narcissistic transcendence. Even when we're doing like meaningful type stuff, there's still a narcissistic quality to it, and it is part of the larger culture of individualism. And people often utilize the term institutions or institutionalization. Well, a lot of people, the way people find their solutions, their trust is in institutions, whether it's banks, whether it's universities and education and affirmation, whether it's jobs and employment and contracts, whether it's health insurance and getting health plans. And additionally, and I'm not degrading all this. I'm just saying, people, instead of like knowing people who provide this directly and like living in a village where that's the village doctor, that's the village teacher, and additionally, it's a matter of having, and even people talk about the village being institution, but at least in that respect, there's a relationship, there's direct relationship, people know each other. In the institutional experience, it's people just having an affiliation, and it's very depersonalized. But at the same time, it's very pragmatic, because it tends to be very effective, and so people start to build their trust in the institution rather than in individuals or other individuals, and so that may serve certain benefits, and it may facilitate a significant amount of order. But at the same time, again, it's at the cost of existential malaise, existential crisis, in a sense of meaninglessness. So. It's a matter of recognizing that there's no such thing as even an institution. It's not a finite thing. It's not a fixed thing. It's a process. And so people are trusting in a process. And that process is significantly also predatory. And so people become increasingly attached and dependent upon processes that are increasingly predatory. So that's one thing, again, further to be mindful of. And when we look at, again, civilization, people can talk about all the different things that are going on, whether it's concerning the environment and climate, whether it's concerning geopolitics and competition and civilizational shifts. And additionally, one thing that can be recognized is that there is, in this experience of institutionalization, particularly at the macro and mega levels, there's an effect of culling. And there's a culture of culling. It's a culture of sterilization, whether it's voluntary or involuntary. And so it's beneficial to be mindful of that. And again, how the experiences of media and communication are part of that experience of the culling and sterilization. And what do I mean by that? By culling, I'm talking about like culling is the process of like when there's a huge amount of animals, of just killing off animals, so that the environment, the climate, the ecosystem can sustain that number of beings. So if there's a lot of deer in a forest, park rangers or government officials talk about culling the deer population, because there are too many deer for the forest to support it. And when that happens, then deer spread out, deer become increasingly aggressive. And so to prevent those type of circumstances, there's a proactive measure of culling to reduce, and it's killing off deer, to reduce the deer population so that it doesn't get to that point that can further endanger human life. And so that applies to many different kind of experiences within wildlife. And so there's a certain legitimacy within that, but it's a nasty thing to think about. And it's a nasty thing to think about in the context of humanity, like the culling of humans. But that's where we are in at this moment. That's what we've been in for generations at this point. It's the culling of humanity, because again, people talk about, it's 7 billion people. How can the world sustain that with all the notions and advances in agriculture and all the unhealthy methodologies of genetic modification to mass produce unhealthy type of stuff? Even then, like it's too much to sustain the numbers. And where are the numbers coming from? It's coming from the benefits of, again, technology, being able to live long, where like multiple generations are able to live simultaneously, and further rates of procreation, further ability to heal certain types of diseases that would annihilate large populations. So because of that, we get large populations, and when our large populations don't have the discipline to like procreate in a responsible and in a healthy way, and that's not a dig at like low-income communities or nations or cultures that tend to have larger families. I mean, there's irresponsibility of procreation concerning the most elite initially, but when there is that lack of discipline and just larger populations, that's when people get into that mindset of culling. And so how is it done? Obviously, when we talk about genocide outright, that's terrible, and people stand up to it because it's easy to recognize, it's easy to say, yo, that's wrong. So when we've seen that, at least for the most part, against certain populations, when we see that, then the rest of humanity see that in a very explicit, short-term way in intentionality. Humanity responds to it and says, yo, that's wrong. Shouldn't be just mass killing people. But the way it's happening now is it's a cultural sterilization. Now, there's examples of this within the native experience here on the Western Hemisphere, where doctors, scientists, government officials intentionally sterilize native women and native kinfolk to prevent the procreation within certain communities. We can look at contraceptives and a lot of the individual sex rights propaganda as ways of minimizing rates of rates of procreation, of having of reproduction, and we can look at further policies of abortion, birth control, and additionally as methodologies of sterilization, cultures of sterilization, and methodologies of minimizing the population. And so it becomes not just like specific acts, it becomes a culture, a systemic way of doing things, a normalization of sterilization. Even looking at the conventional upper income methodology of work, don't get married, don't have children at 20, don't have children at 30, wait till you're established, wait till you have your nest egg, wait till you have your house paid for, wait till you're near retirement, and additionally, way late in life, mid-30s, and additionally, then get married, then have maybe one child or two children. That's a methodology of sterilization. So it's across the board in different respects. And again, it's some of it's intentional, some of it's just like the instinctive kind of methodology of authoritarianism. But at the same time, like again, there's a significant amount of unhealthiness within this, because there's a lot of sense of like what the purpose of procreation is, reproduction, bringing life into this universe, the holy relationship between man and woman, the holy relationship between parent and child, just the Wu Lun that the ancient science wisdom teaches, ancient Chinese wisdom teaches us, the 5 relationships that Confucius and additional Chinese scholars shares with us. So the sages share with us. So that those are things that are lost in the culture of sterilization. So again, it's a matter of being mindful of it, and then speaking and working accordingly from that mindfulness in an increasingly healthy way. The normalization of pollution is another example of a culture of sterilization. When the waters are not drinkable, that's not normal. That's not healthy, and that is a further, again, disassociation with nature, and a degradation of life itself, and the meaningfulness of life, the meaning of life, the purpose of life. So the normalization of pollution, all the exhaust, all the oil. I was looking at the brother talking about uranium, concerning again that popular culture film, I guess is going out or whatever. All the things that advanced technology is based upon, the mining, and additionally, it's all causing devastating effects to the environment. We all know this, we all do, but we're all feeding off of it, and it's normalized. It's difficult not to do it, but it's part of the larger culture of the sterilization, of the disassociation with life, the devaluation of life itself. And it's not just one culture, it's not just one religion, it's not just one ethnicity that's doing it. All kinfolk are guilty and are involved in it. All types of kinfolk are involved in it and guilty of it to varying degrees. And so all kinfolk also, and all ethnicities, all religions have a knowledge of what healthy is, the wisdom that our ancient ancestors and prophets and sages teach us about the healthy relations. So the solutions exist within all people as well. And so it's a matter of tapping into that, of encouraging that, and supporting that, investing within that, living that, cooperating with that, teaching that, and regularly practicing it day in and day out as much as possible. and not judging, not condemning other kinfolk if we see some kind of perceived deficiency, but encouraging, just like we would a child. Like, yo, hold up, that's how we do that. If we did it, we'd be further helpful, and let that speak for itself. If kinfolk are ready for that, cool, we build further. If not, okay, let's keep some distance from that. But it's all love. That's what it is. That's the solution. So it's not a matter of hate and here's our opportunity to like be authoritative against others. Nah, that's not how it works. It's sharing, y'all, and it comes from love. It comes from a selflessness, and it's painful, but it's beautiful. So that's the nature. The squirrel is very adamant. I don't know how territorial it's feeling towards me right now, because it's like, yo, who are you? What you doing in my spot? Are you gonna take my acorns? I heard you talking about acorns. What you doing? I was like, I didn't know you spoke English. I didn't know you know what acorns are. He's like, of course. What you talking about? He's talking about something that exists beyond the words. So, anyways, I'm just translating some of our conversation in humanese. And there's a bumblebee right here. It's not a bumblebee. It's a worker bee. That is just checking out this bench. It's not a picnic table, because that's an atrocity. It's a cookout table. So, anyways, all right. We're talking about solutions: green earth, clean water, healthy plants. I mentioned recently with kinfolk about the binary of predatory and piety. It's not about religion, it's not about race, it's not about ethnicity, it's not even about class or whatever else. It's just about predatory and piety. Those two things. Everybody has a proclivity towards either of those things. And being able to see it and evidence it and discern what to do, what to work, how to work with each of these experiences. And I mentioned before, like, human beings being predatory, and that just being facts. I've shared that before. Again, these things I've referenced before. But what's recently shared, particularly amongst recent conversations, is that, you know what, to be honest, everything is predatory in one way or other. Plants are predatory. Horses are predatory in one way or another, particularly when we talk about it in an existential sense. We can take that competitive nature beyond things. Don't put it beyond a horse, like to attack somebody. Don't put it beyond a deer to attack and mull somebody. Yo, talk about culling deer, where, well, deer can mull kinfolk. So that can be considered predatory, and there can be different rationales or things that precipitate that predatory behavior, but there's that propensity. All that being said, here's the consideration, particularly for humanity, because humanity still is predatory, but at the same time, humanity also is pious. Humanity also has piety. So the consideration is that piety is the essence of all of us. Piety is the essence, and predatoriness is the excess. So everybody has the piety within ourselves. We each have that. The divine nature within each of us. The Holy Spirit exists within each of us. But then in addition to that, we also have the propensity for being predatory, the excess. However we experience the excess, there's a predatoriness within that. And so, again, it's a matter of being mindful of that, because we have a natural inclination to build with each other, to support each other, to love each other, to live in the garden with each other. But we have fears, we have hurts, we have intoxications and occasional greeds and lusts, and additionally. And then we have like the guilt from that and try to overcompensate or hide or deny or whatever else. So there's the continual guidance of reconciliation, of moderation, of atonement, of harmony. But it's easier said than done. And it's easier done when it's regular, continual, on a day-to-day basis. So that's part of the solution. I'm getting ready to wrap this up, because I've gotten some notifications of kinfolk preparing to talk, and additionally, so, and also I've got some other responsibilities to tend to today, so I've got to be mindful of that. I'm going to talk about the media again further. And this is the particular insight recently, is that media diminishes the vision. So again, this is physicality, but it's also existential as well. Like when you look at a screen, like the eyesight generally becomes poor, and the need for corrective lenses, surgery, whatever else it is. So that's one of the effects, one of the consequences of utilizing the devices, that our eyesight is affected in the physical sense. But at the same time, what I recognize also is that when we pay our attention, when we focus our energy, when we focus our concentration on these devices, on this oracle, our vision in terms of imagination is affected adversely. Our vision in terms of our dreaming is affected accordingly as well. Whether it's a matter of becoming increasingly susceptible to the bad experiences with the dreams, and those individuals, beings who have increasing influence within the dream experience, or whether it's just being, well, I have to be careful about talking about the dreaming because it's a different phenomenon. But I am aware that the devices provide have a detrimental effect on people's vision within the dreaming experience. So that's something to be mindful of. As much as the advantages is that these devices have in the wakeful experience of this temporal life, of walking the roads of creation, at the same time, it has a debilitating effect when it comes to the dreaming experience and further. And that affects the wakeful state and how we interact with each other. It also affects our vision concerning our ancestors, our memory of our ancestors, how our ancestors live, what our ancestors look like. And additionally, so it also affects our vision for the future, and our ability to see the future, to see our children, our progeny, God willing, in the next generations, and what's prepared for our progeny in the next generations, because our vision becomes increasingly enveloped in this oracle, and all the manipulations, all the contraptions, the conceptualizations, or was it the conceptions within the devices. So it's beneficial to be mindful of that effect, specifically concerning our vision. And there's a mind meld within the experience of these devices, of the internet, and additionally, and that mind meld is considerably predatory, because that's just the nature of it, and it's not evil or otherwise. It's predatory. So recognizing that, it's beneficial to be mindful of that, and be mindful how much we invest ourselves and how much we invest our vision, and recognize the benefit in stepping away on occasion and investing in our vision of just like the earth, the creation around us, closing our eyes and remembering our ancestors, envisioning our ancestors, envisioning our progeny, envisioning this universe in the next 7 generations, in even in perpetuity, for dor vador, generation after generation. So that type of vision happens when we step away from the devices, and the slow, quiet burn. So that's another consideration. And so the ultimate purpose of this, and the ultimate like methodology, is peace. It's harmony. And that harmony is achieved through the formula that the Buddha shares, that so many of our teachers share: honesty, love, modesty. We can talk about the Panchasilas: honesty, peace, chastity, sharing, sobriety. So those are some of the ancient, even eternal formulae concerning the health and well-being. Now, the last thing I'll share is something that's going to be further like contentious. It's further like charged and uncomfortable or whatever else, but I'll try to keep this under an hour at this point. That's the goal for this point. So we got about 15 minutes there, boss. This goes into like when I talk about the effect of our vision, because the vision is not and looking at the devices and getting enveloped in the cipher here, and getting enveloped in this narcissistic transcendence, getting enveloped in our own somewhat customized algorithmic cocoons or bubbles or echo chambers, or however we want to describe this. Again, we lose further sight of what's actually happening in the world at the moment, and just having the paranoid, everything's happening or whatever. That's not the solution either, because people are just saying, when people do that, people are just voicing the concerns and fears about what's actually going on, but aren't actually watching what's actually going on. They just have a fear of it and just know like, yo, something bad's happening, whatever else. So it's a matter of just watching what's happening and processing it and recognize that whatever's happening now, it's been happening for thousands of years. It's just happening in today's methodology or in today's kind of context, given the circumstances. So, but that type of perspective, that type of honesty is significantly derived when we take a step away from the narcissistic transcendence of the oracle and pay further attention. Now, it's difficult to do because people were avoiding the actualities today even before the internet was invented by Al Gore. Ooh, that's a little bit of a snarky thing. But anyways, that's an inside joke for people who are Americans from 30 years ago, 20 years ago, whatever, whenever the internet was invented. It's actually over 50 years ago, and now lightweight is actually over like 70 years ago. But anyways, my point is this. I'm about to share something that's increasingly involved during the years of Al Gore's vice presidency. And it's an example we're talking about in terms of being aware. So this is just like, this is simple facts. 9/11. Now I don't talk about this too much because I know it's not that much of a priority for people these days. It's something happened that 20 years ago, and so I don't want to be one of those dudes just talking about they're still talking about, like back in my day, people would talk about the JFK assassination and who did it, who was truly doing it, this and that. That was the big thing. But by the time I was growing up in the 80s and 90s, like, yo, that happened 20 years ago. Why are you still talking about that? So I can just imagine that when people start talking about 9/11, as significant as it was, I mean, like, young folk were like, yo, that happened 20 years ago. Why are you still talking about that? It's relevant because people are hiding from what happened then. People are hiding from what happened with JFK. People are hiding from what happened with COVID just a couple years ago. And so 20 years from now, people are like, what are you talking about COVID for? That was like 20 years ago, if people are still talking at all at that time. God willing, yes, people will be, and talking about further healthy things. But my point is that this is something pertaining to 9/11, and it's all related, all connected, because there's things that are happening. There are things that do these things, that commit these acts, these atrocities, that are not held accountable by conventional authority, by general society. And so I'm speaking to this because the nature of healing and reconciliation, the nature of the cleansing of civilization requires the acknowledgement of what actually happened. So here's what I'm sharing. And this, I'm not revealing anything new or whatever. People already know about this, and people who don't even say it already know it too. So, but that being said, here it is. Like 9/11, we can talk about Osama bin Laden all people want. Osama bin Laden might have had some type of involvement, but he's not the one who's the primary precipitator. And there's not necessarily one person who was like the primary person or leader in that scenario. Everybody's involved, but basically, I mean, if you just look at it again, it was a demolition, plain and simple. Now, I can't speak I can't say I was there. I witnessed it, but you can look at it and just tell, common sense. When you see a demolition being done, how it happens, the mechanics of it, and you see what happened with them, you can see it was a demolition. Now, for it to be a demolition, that's very difficult for a terrorist organization to organize 20 years ago. So it's very evident if we accept the very strong evidence that it was a demolition, regardless of what was done beforehand, whatever hit the towers beforehand, what caused the crumbling and caused the deaths of thousands of people, and at that moment, and then even further thousands of people in later life through all the pollution that was, the dust that was kicked up and people breathed in and died from that was caused by demolition, by demolitions, plain and simple. That's the honest truth as much as I can share. Again, I can't provide eyewitness. I was not there, but like that's beyond any other explanation. That's what it is. That's what it was. Now, if we are willing, when we're willing to accept that it was a demolition, that's like, oh, okay, that means like who did that? Who had the availability? So that means it was an inside job. It was the United States that did it against the United States, and it wasn't the first time that happened. That has happened or that happened since then. And so that's scary things, because if we're talking about the United States, who in the United States? What was going on? Now we're talking about what's happening, and we're talking about the actuality of what's happening in life today. So that when we see things like COVID, and additionally, when people talk about it was engineered, this and the other, people want to hide from it. And additionally, but when we acknowledge what happens previously, it's easier to acknowledge what's happening now, particularly with the purpose of solving it. So that's just the facts. Now, here's the thing: I'm speaking from just observing. like watching the video, watching things that happen, and making that conclusion accordingly. Now, that's not my only frame of reference. That's not my only knowledge base. That's not the only evidence that I have. I can tell you, even before it happened, I had knowledge of it happening. I have knowledge of it preparing, because I had dreams when I'm in law school. I'm in law school in the Potomac area when this happens. I'll say it out loud. It's Georgetown University, Washington, D.C., for living there for half a decade before the 11th of September happens. And so I was there when the 11th of September happens. And in the year, at least a year before it actually happens, for at least a year, I had dreams, numerous dreams of it happening, of airplanes crashing, and that might be attributable to just, well, that's the kind of like the hysteria of like society at that moment. Who's to say this and the other? But I have very, very specific. I got squirrels quarreling and doing some new type of moves that I'm seeing for the first time. Some type of karate jumps and everything else like that. So, anyways, distraction. I had dreams during that period. And again, when I'm having the dreams, I'm trying to process it. But again, it's a dream. So, we have to interpret it. I'm young. I'm involved in other things. So I'm just like, interesting. And these were vivid, very powerful dreams. But at the same time, I'm just like, of airplanes crashing. And additionally. And so it could be attributed to anything. So anyways, that's that. Now at the same time, particularly again, a year before it happens, I'm in circles that are in like involved in like things going on within the echelons of society, and we got the helicopter. So during that period, there are a number of occasions when kinfolk would say things to me, and I'm like, yo, that was weird, and like they. Like by that point, like there are all types of mind games going on in law school. But kinfolk who I would have an established relationship with would say things to me that was like revealing of like something like intentional, and it would be something very specific. And sometimes it would be something that was somewhat like almost like the first word that comes to mind is diabolical. Like it was like a little bit graphic, a little bit like hostile. But it was said like in like a smiley thing or whatever, and oftentimes to gauge what my response is going to be, sometimes to just like release some of the pressure of holding that information or whatever else. But it would just be a little thing, and it's like in those circles, like you don't reveal like what that was trippy. What you talking about? You just like, oh, okay, because like sometimes you don't want to know what the person's actually saying, because there's consequences with that knowledge. But anyways, all that saying. During that period leading up to the 11th of September, I received a number of those communications that were somewhat specific, very cryptic, but at the same time, like when I look at it backward after the fact, after the 9/11 happened, I'm like, yo, hold up, okay, I'm seeing like the puzzle parts coming together, and that shows some type evidence of the deliberation of the knowledge, either directly or remotely from what was actually happening or what was planning to happen, and people knowing, because there's a cipher again, and that cipher is involuntary. Like cats can't keep secrets once cats are tapped into a cipher, and cipher is not just like it's not some binary click on click off. They're like layers to it, and so people can be in proximity with a cipher and have certain hints or communications from a cipher without knowing like all the full details of how it applies to the wakeful state, particularly when the communications are facilitated through the dreaming. So I experienced those communications before the 11th of September happens, and after the 11th of September happens, there's just so much hysteria and so much volatility and so much hostility towards anybody who's not towing the line with the propaganda, that anybody who says something that's along the lines of truth, whether it's the loose change or otherwise, visits from not even just like kinfolk in suits, but like even further. And the way the persecution is done these days, it's not even a matter of guns. It's not even a matter of like troops or assassins' bullets. I mean, it's chemical. It's further like involved. It's in many ways it can be slow motion or otherwise. So it's like either way. My point is that I have that awareness from many years ago, and it's beneficial to be honest about that, to be aware of it, to understand, like, okay, again, if it's not a terrorist group, who's doing it? It's the U.S. Okay, it's the government. It's not just the government, it's the corporations. It's not just the corporations, but it's the cults that are involved in the leadership of the corporations. Okay, what's the purposefulness of it? Is it just to stir up hysteria? Is it to like poke a thorn into the side of the United States that precipitates an invasion of the accused aggressors, or even like somebody who has a relationship with the accused aggressors, for the purposes of extracting oil and other natural materials to benefit the machinery of imperialism? So that's one scenario of rationalization or whatever. But the point is, like, that type of assessment, that type of diagnosis only happens when we are honest about what's happening and what the likelihoods are. If we're looking at this in terms of like a physical affliction, like a health affliction, like, it's not a matter of just like hiding our heads in the sand. It's like, oh, it's no way is this, no way is this. It must be some voodoo magic. No, it's like, okay, let's look at the cause and effect, the likelihoods, and how we can heal things. So that's 20 years ago. And again, we can apply the same thing to COVID, and we can apply the same thing to whatever is being experienced at this moment. But we can only do that when we're honest about the aggregate, because it's all related. So if we're genuinely interested in healing and well-being for ourselves as individuals, if we're genuinely interested in our healing and well-being of us, of our families, of our villages, regardless, black, white, rich, poor, yellow, brown, or whatever, if we're genuinely interested in that health and well-being, regardless of where we're coming from and who we are and how we pray or meditate or who we curse, we might be mindful of that, because that cursing is not healthy either. But regardless of where we're coming from, the answer is the same, and the necessary discipline and the honesty is the same. We have to call things out, and it's not a matter of vilifying whoever plotted and everything and whoever detonated the demolitions. And there's evidence. People testify from working in the TARS at the time about people visiting at unusual, like people. If you look at the interviews on Loose Change, and the security guards who are not conspiracy cats, they're just regular blue collar dudes who testify about like night crews coming in unexplainably, like and having some type of authorization and doing a lot of work on a number of the floors. And it just so happens that those floors later on are evidence of where the plumes of what look like demolitions that are demolitions that, when we look at it in a common sense way, happen. So anyways, it takes that type of honesty, and then from the honesty, cooperating with each other amidst all the differences. We ain't got to be the same. We ain't got to like each other. We ain't got to eat the same foods. We ain't got to speak the same language. We ain't got to pray the same way. We ain't got to do the same rituals or everything else like that. But we do have to find a way of living with each other, and we do have to find a way of being honest with each other, because the conditions affect all of us, and the solution requires all of us involved in manifesting the health and healing and well-being. We need to cooperate with some way. We don't got to like each other. We ain't got to like each other, but we got to get along enough to keep this garden living amidst the fire, amidst the water, amidst the air, the soil, the darkness, the seas, and everything. So, but it requires the honesty. And in certain respects, yes, it require some reconciliation of accounting for the past atrocities that we commit against each other, all across the board. And I guess that's where I'll leave it. Which is at the beginning. Because when we talk about the context of civilization, there's evidence, and this is something. Oh, that was interesting. That was like a look. It was the size of a bumblebee. It was the mechanics, like the flying of a housefly, but like some kind of like the colorings of a zebra. So fascinating. But when we talk about solution, we talk about history, we talk about our roots, we talk about where we come from. Now, there are many different narratives about creation, where we all come from as a collective people, as specific people, and additionally, and there's the recognition that all of these narratives are true. There's truth within each of these narratives, and there's actually congruence amidst all these narratives. Like, it doesn't have to be one or the other. It's everything combined. So it's our job of figuring like how it all exists and bringing it together. That's the stage of evolution that we're in, is bringing these narratives together and seeing how it fits together. So along those lines, here's something that we recognize as an Earth civilization, as a collective civilization. That based on the preponderance of evidence that comes from our different teachings, from our ancestors, and additionally, the beginnings of Earth civilization. We can talk about the garden being someplace in Africa. Look at the Great Lakes just thinking of like where people could live perennially throughout the year without fear of or the concern of winter, of where we need shelter and have some advanced knowledge about how to build things to protect ourselves. Just live plainly and simply in a garden, buck naked, eating from the fruits. And additionally, where could we live like that year round? What are the main land masses where we can do that? In the east and the west, whether it's the Great Lakes area, particularly of Africa, or whether it's the rainforest of this western hemisphere. Those are predominantly the places where we can live like that year round, where the produce grows continually and additionally. So that's one consideration, but that's a little bit like next level type of game in terms of the consideration of civilization, because civilization emerges a little bit later. There's migrations, like I said, there's the flood situation, everything else like that. But when we look at civilization as a continual sequence, a linear experience, the evidence shows us, again, from all the teachings, from all the things, the evidence shows us that there is an initial civilization, a predominant civilization in Africa of black folk. And that doesn't necessarily mean that black folk being superior. That doesn't even necessarily mean that everybody comes from being black folk. But there is evidence when we look at the history, the historic portrayals of civilization, of the roots of it existing within Africa. We can look at the Nile. We can look at the geography and the anthropology of human civilization, and seeing Nile as an umbilical cord that goes from the Great Lakes region of Africa, Uganda, Tanzania, Ethiopia, Kenya, and additionally, and then proceeds northwards, straight up north to Egypt. And then we can recognize Egypt, Greece, Assyria, Israel, Palestine, eventually Rome, and additionally what people often refer to as the cradle of civilization. It's the cradle that emerges from the umbilical cord. How about that? So that's what we see as a sequence. First, Africa, historically, and again, it doesn't mean that Africa is superior. It doesn't mean that even Africa was altogether righteous. Altogether, absolutely. Like there's subjugation and subordination and enslavement and affliction and everything else like that precipitates people migrating and finding other solutions, and even having certain vitriol towards Africa. And we can find this even within Torah, and additionally within the narrative of Mitzrayim and further. But that's a further involved discussion. But what we see in terms of what's evidenced through the writings, the ancient and holy writings of Earth civilization, is that from Africa, then African civilization subsides, because these are just the natures of the ebbs and flows, and eventually Middle Eastern civilization emerges. Again, we have all the different kingdoms and things from Egypt, and we can talk about whether Egypt is Africa, and that's another conversation. But particularly, again, Assyria, we can talk about Babylon, we can talk about again Israel, the whole narrative of Torah and the children of Israel. We can talk about eventually Islam and further. Now that's a long leap. That's a few thousand years there, but like that whole region is very extremely influential and predominant within Earth's civilizational experience, and that's, we're setting aside what's happening in the Western hemisphere, and that's appropriate to recognize. But in terms of the aggregate of Earth experience, the Middle East becomes particularly predominant during a certain stage within human life, within Earth experience, civilizationally. So we go from an African civilization predominance to a Middle Eastern civilizational predominance. Now what we're experiencing in recent centuries and recent generations is the European civilization predominance. Again, European civilization bringing in Judeo-Christian religiosity, bringing in the Greco-Roman methodologies of governance, politics, organization, and then utilizing Islamic mathematics and establishing all this phenomenal, amazing technology, architecture, infrastructure in terms of city grids, transportation, communications, weaponry, and additionally. So that, obviously, for the past few centuries, European civilization is significantly predominant in the world experience. So we've gone from Africa to the Middle East to Europe. Now, what we find ourselves in is, and again, that's not a dig on Asian civilization. China is significant. Again, the whole Western civilization, Maya, Aztec, Inca, Haudenosaunee, so many civilizations within Western experience. But in terms of what the world knows collectively, the predominance is from Africa to the Middle East to Europe, and now what we're seeing is it's transitioning. It's migrating from European dominance to Asian dominance, particularly East Asian dominance and Chinese civilization. It's a different nature, and additionally, but that's just what we observe in terms of the migration. It's not what we're predicting, it's not what we're prophesizing, it's not what we're soliciting, it's not what we're advocating, it's what we are observing. And with that observance, it's what we are preparing in terms of continuing to cultivate and maintain and steward the harmony, the well-being, the order of world civilization. So that's what we observe. Africa, Middle East, Europe, now we're going to East Asia. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it'll be exclusively East Asia. Maybe a partnership of predominance between East Asia and South Asia. Maybe a partnership of predominance between East Asia, South Asia, and indigenous culture, as there's a return to indigeneity amidst the subsiding of imperialism as the main methodology of order and additionally cooperation. So that's what we are observing. And there is a natural healing. There's a natural settling beyond any individual's will, beyond any individual's power, beyond any individual's group or will or power. Something like that. Individual groups, will or power. So there's a greater power, there's a greater will, there's a greater harmony, there's a greater truth, there's a greater nature. And there are many kinfolk who are increasingly inclined towards acknowledging that, towards studying that, towards cooperating with that, towards investing within that, towards living it, towards practicing it, and building from it. So that's the nature of our collective evolution, progression within this experience of creation and civilization. So that's what I share, and the things that I share are in this context. And the irony is that it's not irony. It's just that it's like the beautiful paradox is that those who are increasingly learned in this nature, in this harmony, who have this wisdom, are much less powerful in terms of like a conventional sense. Like don't have weapons, don't have armies, because that's not the nature of it. And so are increasingly dependent upon other kinfolk for basic support, because that's the nature of this wisdom from ancient days. From the kinfolk seeking teachings from the Brahmin, who has the wisdom, becoming with the fire and bringing the offertory food, and additionally because they know that's what the teacher needs, because the teacher isn't going out and conquering things to take it to oneself. That's just the nature of it. Or if it's Menke traveling and just accepting residence where the governors receive them and provide the stipends accordingly. That's the nature of this wisdom. Whether it's Abraham Avinu traveling in his tent through the wilderness and providing hospitality to the kinfolk who visit him, because he doesn't have his own kingdom, his own land where he sets up shop until the purchase of Machfalah. But that's the nature of the wisdom. And indeed, Abraham Avinu leaves his homeland. He leaves the place where he's familiar and he has some standing, because the corruption and because there isn't a place for that righteous living in those circumstances. So the nature of the wisdom is one that is increasingly aloof, but not just aloof, but dependent. The beggar's bowl, whether that's individually or as a collective, like the Kohanim. There's a dependence upon those who are in the earth, who are invested in the competition, and additionally, but who also recognize the benefit of the righteousness, the wisdom, and the necessity of feeding the kinfolk who share that wisdom and that righteousness. So that's the symbiotic relationship. And that's where we are. Again, there's the individuals who do that on the individual trod. We are cultivating a collective way of that trod. And sharing and cooperating. So we don't hate nobody. We love everybody. We work to optimally cooperate with everybody as much as we can. We call things out, but when we call things out, we are calling out the behavior. We are calling out the action that is harmful, because it's necessary to call it out. It's harmful for the people immediately who are the victims of that, one way or the other. It's also harmful for the people who are doing it. And so we share as much as we can a healthier way of doing it, as much as we understand what that healthier way is. And we're not perfect. We're not better or worse than anybody else. We just have a skill set, a talent, a study, a discipline, and we share accordingly. So that's the purpose of all of this. And so there's a saying that one of our teachers, El Haj Malik Shabazz Malcolm X, shares in his autobiography that's included within the film depicting his life from Spike Lee. It says, and if there's anything that benefits anyone, like all the praise goes to the Most High, Allah. Only the mistakes are ours. So any of the shortcomings or selfishness or whatever. We have our susceptibilities, we have our approximations, and further. So that's on us, and we have to answer for that. We will answer for that one way or the other. We will, because that's the nature. That's our faith. That's what we're committed to. But in the meanwhile, we continue to share as best we can, to the benefit of others as much as we can. So that's the purpose of everything. That's the purpose of what we do. It's all love. Sometimes we can have a shortness of patience sometimes, because again, we have these proclivities. But regardless, even then, we have to answer for that. We do answer for that. We will answer for that. So we solicit patience from others, and understanding and cooperation. Yo, what we say with the schoolhouse now is like, yo, when kinfolk want to come through, yo, you're welcome, please. We're working on the aesthetics to make it increasingly comfortable and proper, and we do have discipline in terms of like headwear and taking off the footwear and proper clothing, being modest, both men and women. And people can take offense to that and say, oh, you're infringing on my rights additionally. But if that's the case, then you don't have to visit. But this is the environment that we're cultivating. And it's like going to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, going to the dojo or whatever. Like when kinfolk are ready to like work out and spar, yo, there's a gi, there's some type of, there's a dress code, because that's what the work involves. And so when we're doing the study, when we're doing these kind of conversations, there's a dress code, there's a way of being. And so it's along these lines. So it's different for many people, wearing a headscarf or whatever else. It's not a matter of being like me, but there's reasons why we do these things. And it's not our own innovations, but we are taught this. This is part of the cost of tuition for receiving the knowledge that we receive. And it's our joy and our obligation to continue wearing this, a head covering, modest, full length sleeves and long pants and long skirts for long dresses for women. It's part of our responsibility, because we are given this wisdom from our teachers, from our ancestors, from our prophets and sages, who say this is the wisdom, this is the righteousness, and this is how to interact. This is how to dress and behave with each other, in order to live this righteousness, and even order to share and study this righteousness. So we're not trying to impose it upon anybody else, but this is just the dress code, just like other places have a dress code. If you go to a science laboratory, and you wear gloves and goggles and things, yes, it's for physical safety additionally, but that it's just the protocols that are involved. So anyways, that's what we shared this moment. We did not keep it under an hour because, of course. However, that's much of it. There's so much further, but like I said, we're focusing on an embassy right now, having a secure land, a safe land, not necessarily our own land, but some kind of arrangement with our kinfolk of this earth and world system that says, okay, it's okay for us to be in this particular place and we can do our work. Because it's when we have that type of stability within our home front, that we have stability and strength and longevity within the services of healing and well-being, of education that we provide for the benefit of other kinfolk. So we have to have the secure home front to provide that type of service in a proper way. So that's what we are concentrating at this moment. Establishing a Rastafari embassy here in the Kyoka area. We're also working at establishing one in Mauritius, because we're getting it's a tough road here in Ohio. There's the consideration that the world system is increasingly receptive to such a phenomenon, such an entity, such a project being established on the land of Mauritius, in the geopolitics and geography of Mauritius compared to other places. But in the meanwhile, I'm in Ohio, so we're building here, and there is support, there is encouragement. It's a difficult conversation, and so it might be slower than what it should be or what it may want to be, but we progress in that respect, and amidst that slowness, amidst the hesitation, we look at other options as well, because there's only so much time in this life, so we got to have some answers and solutions in a timely fashion. So anyways, with patience, understanding, I'm 50 years old, I got these gray hairs. Gray hairs don't necessarily mean righteousness, but in some ways it does mean some type of patience and endurance. And so when young kinfolk are telling me about being patient, I'm like, yo, it's a process. Like, hold up, come on, you're half my age. How are you going to talk to me about process and patience and process? So, and repetition. So all that being said, it's love, it's peace, it's blessings. Respect and honor to His Majesty Haile Selassie I. Respect and honor to Her Majesty Waizara Manen. Respect and honor to all our ancestors and all our prophets and all our sages, known and unknown. All praise and thanks to the Most High Elohim. Blessed love and peace in Rastafari.